Hey everyone, welcome back to Reading with Tatiana. Today I'm reviewing Peach Blossom Spring by Melissa Fu, and I gave this book a 5 out of 5. And I already know it's going to be a top 10 book for me for 2023. My Booktuber shout today goes out to Kristen Crave's book. I've been following her for a while now. I think one of the first channels I followed when I joined Booktube. She posts pretty regularly, but why I'm shouting out her today is she did a birthday book haul video 9 months ago, and she recommended this book. It's been on my TBR ever since, and I'm so glad I finally got to read it. So if you want to check out Kristen's channel, I'll link it down below. And before I get my full book review, I always appreciate it if you're watching this video to please hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up. And if you have read this book, I'd love to hear what you thought down below because I just love this book. Like, I actually read it in like basically one day because I was flying back home from Arkansas. So I like started the night before my flight and I had like 8 hours of traveling and I finished it, and it was so good. I like cried on the plane. It's just amazing. So if you read this book, if you loved it or even hated it, I'd love to hear what you thought down below because this book was just so great for me. This book is a pretty recent book. It is published in 2022. I think on Goodreads, it's like actually one of the top historical fiction books awards winners or something like that. And the genre is again historical fiction, specifically multi-generational, multi-decade set in China. A bit about the author, Melissa Fu. So this is her debut novel. She did a wonderful job. She grew up in North New Mexico and lived in Texas, Colorado, New York, Ohio, and Washington, all over America. She now lives in the UK with her husband and children, and she has an academic background in physics and English, and she has worked as a teacher, as a curriculum developer, and a consultant. This is kind of just her blurb from her website. I couldn't find too many fun facts about her online. I think it's because she's a fairly new author. I do want to say that in the book she specifically states it's not a biographical of her life. However, there's lots of like parallels of her and the protagonist, one of the protagonists, Lily, which I find pretty interesting. Alright, so let's get into the premise and the characters and the story. I mean, this book has, again, it's like a multi-generational saga, so there's like so many like details, and I don't want to get into all of it because truly I think this book is worth reading. So a very high level premise is, again, it's set in China from the years 1940s to the 2000s. It starts in China, and then as the family has to escape China due to the Civil War, and then how China developed and stuff, they have to flee to Taiwan and Shanghai, or back to Shanghai, back to China, and then ultimately the family, or the son, immigrates to America. There's such a huge cast of characters, like honestly, like it's just so wonderful. But the three main characters that I identified with, there's Maylin, who is the mother. She gets married in like rural China, and she is the one that has to flee with her young son Renshu. And the story kind of migrates to as Renshu grows up and he's fleeing with his mom. Renshu then is the one that migrates to America and makes a life for himself and meets an American woman. And then he has a child called Lily, who's half Chinese, half American. And then basically it kind of comes full circle that Lily wants to find her heritage. So that's kind of like the premise of the book. And it's just so great because, Maylin, all she does is try to survive and leave China and find a safe place for her and her son. Renshu comes to America and tries to build a safe life for him and his family. Lily, she is raised very American, has no ties to her heritage, but she knows her dad's Chinese, so she tries to like find roots back to her culture. But Renshu, because he fled all of that, tries to kind of leave Lily separate from that. And this book is just wonderful and talks about that dynamic, kind of talks about where you come from, you trying to like leave your past because it was so dangerous and try to forget it because it's so traumatic, but then the generations later, they want to learn about their past, and it's kind of discussion of, do they deserve to know? Is it better to let the past go, to honor the past? It's just so great. Common themes in this book, you can probably guess. The first one is war. Maylin and Renshu, their life is kind of left all troubled up because of war in China, and ultimately how all humans just really want stability for your family. The second thing that I noticed is the idea of the government and who to trust and who not to trust, because in this war it talks about the Kuomintang, I believe, which is a nationalist party of China, who ultimately go to Taiwan, and then also the creation of CCP, the China Communist China Party. And in this book there's lots of spies, and when Ren Shu goes to America, even though it's in America, he has to be careful who he talks to, who are Chinese who also came from China or Taiwan. One thing that stuck with me is the power of surviving, and moving is surviving. If you're surviving, then you don't have to think about the past they left behind. And it's so important to always look forward, never look behind, because no need to ruminate on the past. And the power of hope, especially in a war-torn life, and how even if you're moving from curse to curse to curse, that hope will always drive you forward. And I thought that was very beautiful. There's also this classical poem in China that the book alludes to. It's called San Ji Jing, which stands for Free Character Classic. And 4 lines I really like from the poem. I think the actual poem is very long, but in the book it highlights. I'll just share the first 4 lines. People at birth are naturally good. Their natures are similar. Their habits make them different. And I really like that poem because when you're born, you're very pure, but life happens to you, and for whatever reason, you change over your life. So I think this book talks about even when you meet evil people, just know that in the beginning, they were good-hearted. And maybe they can change back, but right now when you meet them, maybe you're not at their best place, or maybe you're not the best-hearted. As I gave this book a 5 out of 5, there weren't too many things I didn't like. The only thing I didn't like was the way the prose is written. Is sometimes it's not always clear whose perspective we're following. Like it'd be Mei Lin, and then the next paragraph would be Ren Shu, and it's not a clear change, but however it is pretty easy to catch on. That's the only thing, because I felt it flipped between characters a bit too quickly for me. Things I like. I mean, if you're already watching this, I feel like you can probably tell there's so many things I like, but I just want to highlight the things I loved about this book. So the first one is, in this book, there's lots of folklore, like Chinese folklore stories mixed into the story, and also lessons learned by Ren Shu, especially when he's a child to teenage years and he's fleeing turmoil with his mom. And I just love that because, I think as someone that's a child, used to be a child, similar to you, who used to be a child, there's so many there's Aesop fables in North America, or I grew up going to Chinese school too, so a lot of these folklore stories have a lot of nostalgia for me. So I think the power of folklore mixed with nostalgia is really powerful, and it was done in this book, and it was really great. I also love the relationship between Mei Lin and Ren Shu. I thought it was very beautiful. Also, one thing I love about this book, because I am ethnically Chinese, but I was born in Canada, so I actually have not a lot of cultural ties to my mother and father's country. I just don't really know a lot about what happened in China, so I really love how this book made history interesting and gave it a story. So it gave me a new perspective and a better understanding of the Civil War and how the CCP in present day came to begin, and also the history of Taiwan, because I always hear news that Taiwan wants to be independent from China, but China wants it back because they think Taiwan's part of China. And I never understood why, and when you read Wikipedia pages, it's just very convoluted, and this book kind of put it into perspective because it personifies people into the history, and I really enjoyed that. It also made me understand a lot about how my grandparents were born in the 1920s in China, and this story gave me a lot of perspective on why my grandparents weren't always so keen to share their childhood, or when they talk about the past, they just gave very aloof answers. And this book really talks about how people don't always want to talk about their past, and that's fine. I think I grew up in a generation where I've documented everything, and we talk about the past and our trauma and that kind of stuff. But I think our parents and grandparents are really not from the generation, and there's no right or wrong, it's just different. So this book really gave me that understanding. It was just really good. It just made history come alive, and I just loved it. And obviously this book, all the characters aren't factual and aren't real people, but all these things come from kernels of truth, and I just really enjoyed it. On Goodreads, this book got an average of 4.21 out of 5, which is very high. Bad reviews where people felt that it was just so sad because it was just tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. But I think that's very realistic when you're reading historical fiction, especially when you're set against a war-torn country. People also felt it was too rushed. It was also moving from one scenario to the next, which I can agree with because it is a multi-decade saga, and I do think like the author was trying to like get to a next plot point and trying to do it really quickly. So I can agree with that. I mean, I do think the book could be longer. It could be like thousands of pages. I probably still would enjoy it. So I think that's why people felt it was too rushed, just because there's so many good plot points, and you have to get there quite quickly, or it might feel like it drags. People that felt it was good and want to quote one quote on Goodreads is, "The characters are rich and compelling, demonstrating some wonderful qualities. The novel paints a vivid, intimate, and heart-wrenching picture that would make it difficult to put this one behind me." Totally agree. I just felt it was so good. You get so invested in the good and bad characters, and it's just so great. People also felt the author did a good job painting the generational differences between Maylin the mom, Renshu the son, and then Lily the daughter of Renshu later on, which I definitely agree with. I think you should read this book if you love multi-generational, multi-decade sagas and also historical fiction. This is just a great read. Now I'll share how this book made me feel, because if someone recommends me a book, I always like to ask them how it made them feel, because if you ask me a year, 5 years from now, I probably won't remember exactly the details of this book, but I'll also remember how a book made me feel. So this book, it made me feel all the emotions. It was just so good. As I mentioned earlier, I cried in the book. I cried while reading the book, which is very rare. I think the last time I cried during the book was maybe Salt Houses from like a few years ago, but it's very rare that book will make me cry, and this book was just so great. I mean, I cried because there's so many sad moments, but also very sweet moments. It was just so great. Highly recommend it. Thanks for watching until the end of my book review for Peach Blossom Spring by Melissa Fu. I highly recommend this book. If you read it, let me know what you thought down below. If you want to join me next time, I'm reading a non-fiction book. It's called Gratitude, and it's kind of a self-help book about changing your perspective and being more positive in life. Again, thanks for always watching my reviews, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!